an ounce of logic is worth more than a pound of tradition that's become weathered through the passage of time. From that really helped me with the idea that self-defense needs to be evidence-based and it needs to be principle-based. This is how real attacks happen, and these are the principles that we see succeed again and again. We started doing some of that. It wasn't long after that then somebody sent me a long video that had like 30 seconds of action at the end, but like 5 minutes of nothing in the beginning. And I had software on my computer to do video editing. I just didn't know how to use it. And so to the YouTubes and, type in a tutorial. In the middle of that tutorial said, hey, if you want to do a voiceover, here's how you do voiceover and here's how you put graphics in. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, heck, if I just talked over it instead of typing it in the description, probably that'd be better for people. And if I put some graphics in, some arrows and some lines and stuff, I could be like the John Madden of on-camera violence.
John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
Hey, I want to talk about active self-protection. I think it's one of the coolest things that we have access to real-world violence. And if we study that, we can be more safe, not just for ourselves, but our loved ones. It's great information. Back in the day, not so very long ago, it was like old wives' tales and stuff that we based our self-defense strategies on. And now there's concrete evidence that can really show us a lot if we're interested. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about your background, because you have a very interesting and unique background. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what things were like for you growing up, where you're from, and how you got from where you were to where you are, which is a very interesting story.
Well, I was very young when I was born.
A former child?
Yeah, I grew up from a child. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and just a kind of regular, typical family in a lot of ways. And, I was the youngest of two. Mom and dad were hardworking folks. They were both full-time employees. So my sister and I, we were latchkey kids. Well, I'm not super duper young, but from the time I was maybe 11 years old. And, typical normal upbringing. My first big boy job in the real world. I got out of high school, went to college for a semester, and, decided, man, that's way expensive. Went to junior college for a year after that. Then I enlisted in the Navy, and that was my first kind of big boy job, was making hot water the hard way in Uncle Sam's Canoe Club. I did that for 8 years. There's a story there too. I got accepted into a very competitive commissioning program when I was in training as a nuclear reactor operator. Got about 16 weeks from my commission as a naval officer, got rear-ended by a drunk driver and blew out a couple of discs in my back. And, anybody who's ever been in the military can tell you, the minute you become a broken part in the machine, then the machine doesn't really care so much about you anymore. They just take
this. It's the same in law enforcement, John. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah,
totally, man. I mean, it's a mission-driven organization. And so, I tell folks, just like on your car, when your water pump breaks, you don't sit and go, gosh, I wonder what factors led into that water pump and what we can do to make it better. You take the freaking water pump out, you put a new one in, and you just send that one off for reconfiguration. And that's what they did. So, I got out after 8 years. I was on an aircraft carrier for a little while. And I'm proud of my service, but, was planning on doing it for a career, originally when I was going to get my commission. Left the service, at the end of 2002 and, worked while I was going to graduate school in retail management. And what I did for graduate school is I went to seminary. So I was actually the first person in history to use the VA's vocational rehabilitation program for a religious education. And that was under President Bush at the time, W's faith-based initiative. So I was a vocational pastor for 14 and a half years, 2 different churches. I also taught part-time at, both, an undergraduate school and at the seminary that I graduated from. So did the teaching gig for about 9 years part-time, full-time pastorate for 14 years. Right when I got out of graduate school, I got into self-defense. Kind of in parallel. I started carrying a firearm because I was in retail management and I was in particularly video games. So for anybody who's in the know on that, I ran a couple of Hollywood videos and their attached Game Crazy locations. They're out of business now. So, this back in the old country,
So how can I confirm that you actually work for them?
You never
that's
can. It doesn't exist, right?
Joke,
I could say I was a Toys R Us manager for 10 years and you wouldn't know any better.
Exactly.
So I did that, and I started carrying a firearm because managers were getting mugged and even killed for Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s around the holiday season. And so I was like, not me, fam. So I went and got my CCW. I bought, the wrong gun. I loaded it with the wrong ammo. I put it in a marginal holster and carried it around for a while as a lucky rabbit's foot. And at the same time, my son, who was a little bitty guy at the time, he's a grown adult now, but, he was a little bitty guy, and he was like, "Hey, Papa, come take, karate with me." Well, he was doing that as his extracurricular activity. We were homeschooling at the time. And so, after I got out of grad school, I started taking that with him. I thought I'd do it for 6 months just to have something to do with my son, well, turns out now that's been 19 years, and, he did it for another probably 10, and then got into high school, and football and girls, put an end to that.
Yeah.
Which is fine and great. And, so yeah, started studying martial arts, realized pretty quickly that if I was going to carry a firearm that, I needed to take it at least as seriously as my martial arts training. So I started training, with firearms as well. And, in 2011, I got my first instructor certifications, and it just kind of organically happened. I never planned on ASP becoming my solo occupation. In fact, I only really started the business just as an aside while I was pastoring. Anybody who knows, I was a pastor of a Baptist church. I probably wouldn't identify, I wouldn't identify as a Baptist today, but, it doesn't pay a lot, right? For the most, people tend to see the megachurch pastors and, they're making it rain and rolling around in jets. The vast majority are just the opposite, man. They're scrapping paychecks, and, their wife works full time or part time, or they work a second job, something to try to put food on the table. That was who we were. So my part-time gig for a long time was teaching at the local college. And then I started the firearms training business just to basically write off ammo and to have a little bit of money to do the stuff that I wanted to do, because I wanted to train and take classes. And then that just grew. The social media presence came about because, I got interested and passionate about self-defense and about, self-defense with firearms in particular, but not exclusively. And so, I started posting about it on my Facebook. And of course, some of the folks at church just weren't into that.
That's what I wanted to ask you, brother, because that seems like a kind of a strange combination, not to you or me, but I could see how, your average, I don't know what the average churchgoer is, but they may think you're off the deep end a little bit for delving so deep into self-defense and firearms and all that. That's something that you encountered, I take it.
I mean, plenty of people have been super supportive and great. And I would say, the vast majority of my congregation had no problems at all. But I looked at that seriously. We in particular, we had a family who had lost a daughter to being murdered with a firearm, by her significant other. And of course, me getting into that was hard for them emotionally. And that led to some hurt feelings and lack of understanding. And so I was like, well, listen, I'm going to be who I'm going to be. Like, I'm not going to change who I am. And I never was one of those pastors who would hide who I was and hide and try to conform to expectations, but I try to accommodate where I could. And so I started a Facebook page because Facebook had just started allowing pages, for the company, just so then that way I wasn't talking about gun stuff on my personal Facebook. And I was like, hey, if you want that stuff, go over there and follow me. And then it really grew from there. And then Facebook started allowing videos. And somebody sent me a real video of somebody getting a woman just getting absolutely murdered by her baby mama. And he attacked her with a knife. And, that was a watershed moment. There's a couple of them, but that was a big one because I was like, whoa. So I took that night. That was in 2014 or early 2014. And I took it on my BlackBerry Storm to my martial arts class that night. That'll tell you how old this was. I had a BlackBerry Storm and took it to my martial arts class. And before class, I showed it to my instructor, and I was like, he's a good friend. His name's Lawrence Robinson. Today, he's an 8th degree black belt, an incredible transformative martial artist and a really good guy and my friend. On the mats, he's Master Robinson. Off the mats, he's my friend Lawrence. And, we were off the mat and I was like, Lawrence, whoa, dude, I don't know what to do about this. Like, this is scary. And I don't feel like I have a solution for this as a guy that's been studying martial arts for, like 8 years now. And have I missed it? Is this later in the system? Like, what do we do? And
John, had you had some training in like counter, edge weapon, stuff?
There's some.
It's pretty, if it's like my traditional martial arts training, and in my sense, it was very open to studying other methods and everything else, and always encouraging of that. But honestly, I mean, we had some edge weapon defense techniques, but you would have to be a magician and control time and make your opponent move in slow motion and stuff to really have a viable chance of these techniques working. So in some regards, and I hate to say this because I often think some training is better than no training, but minimal training when you're talking about defending yourself against a knife or other edge weapon, it could instill that false sense of security where you think you know what you're doing because you're able to pull these techniques off in the dojo with a semi-compliant or maybe fully compliant uke, right?
Right.
And then in the real world, it doesn't go down like that.
There's certainly some of that. So the beauty for me was, and before that, yeah, I would agree with you. So what I studied and continue to study is a derivative today. I call it a derivative of Ed Parker's Kempo. It's not Kempo today. Like I want to respect all Kempoists that what I study today, what I teach, when I do teach empty-handed skills is not Kempo. But if you squint a little bit, you'd be like, there's some Kempo in that, isn't there? Yeah, for sure. So that was kind of a watershed moment there too, because Lawrence said, well, let's workshop it, John. Like, I don't know that we have that attacking style in the system. So let's grab dummy knives and attack each other with them tonight. And in this manner, and see if we can find any solutions and solve for X. And so we did for 90 minutes. We didn't go that hard, certainly at the beginning, you know what I mean? Like, You're not just going to go, but and at the end of that, I felt like, okay, wait a minute. At least I have a vocabulary here now that I'm not in the dark going, oh no, what do I do? Don't get me wrong. I don't care how advanced, real combatives, real life, your edged weapon training is. Getting attacked with a knife sucks and you are going to get hurt. That's just the bottom line. But I had some vocabulary. And I posted that on the company Facebook page and said, hey, here's what we worked on in class tonight. Just in the description, this is what we worked on. So maybe, you can use this, to make your training more realistic. And it went kind of viral, for the time. Now, today I would say, I think it had 80 or 100,000 views or something like that, which, today wouldn't be any big deal, but back then was humongous. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? So, as people sent those to me, I started bringing those to class and saying, hey, why don't we work on this? And then I started, so then pretty soon Lawrence was like, hey dude, you're the guy that's working on this. You start teaching it. You start doing that in class when we have them and you lead us in this stuff. And he's such a humble man. And
yeah, that's an open-minded instructor right there who has his students' best interests at heart. And I would say that's the vast majority, but there are some that, would, say, no, that's not valid. Or even though there's a video of that, if you just adapt this part of this kata where we do such and such, that will work for you. You know what I mean? But this instructor listened to you, saw that there was a problem that you guys might not have had a solution for, and you guys war gamed it. That's the kind of thing that I do as well with whether it's weapon retention or counter weapon tactics. I think it's important to look at identify the problem and then just figure out what is the most viable solution or a viable solution versus trying to make that problem fit into a system of martial arts that may be 200 years old and maybe was more focused on fighting someone with a samurai sword, for instance, although in this particular scenario, maybe that would work a little bit. But no, that's a great approach.
Yeah, and Lawrence was great. And one of my favorite sayings from Ed Parker, who founded the first commercial martial arts school in the United States, was that an ounce of logic is worth more than a pound of tradition that's become weathered through the passage of time. Love that, right? That's amen and hallelujah. So from that really helped me with the idea that self-defense needs to be evidence-based and it needs to be principle-based. This is how real attacks happen, and these are the principles that we see succeed again and again. And so, we started doing some of that. It wasn't long after that then somebody sent me a long video that had 30 seconds of action at the end, but 5 minutes of nothing in the beginning. And I had software on my computer to do video editing. I just didn't know how to use it. And so to the YouTubes and, type in a tutorial. In the middle of that tutorial said, hey, if you want to do voiceover. Here's how you do voiceover, and here's how you put graphics in. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, heck, if I just talked over it instead of typing it in the description, probably that'd be better for people. And if I put some graphics in, some arrows and some lines and stuff, I could be like the John Madden of on-camera violence. And that was the moment where it happened. Nobody had done that at all that I'd ever seen in the past. There's still nobody doing it like we do. Here we are, we've been doing it 10 and a half, 11 years this month. In fact, next week. Wow.
John,
it's the 7th today. So
I know this stuff's always changing, but talk a little bit about subscribers and views and stuff, because I think the listeners and viewers might be a little surprised at how many subscribers and views you're getting on a lot of your stuff.
Yeah, the big channel. So we have 2 YouTube channels. We have the daily, the big channel is a daily lesson of a real life incident that happened to somebody with lessons that come from that. We have a second channel, which is a training channel. We teach handgun skills, rifle skills, shotgun skills, legal and moral self-defense, some limited gear reviews, stuff like that over there. The big channel has right at 3.5 million subscribers today. It gets anywhere from 5 or 6 million views a month up to 40 to 50 million views a month on some months. The channel's got 1.9 billion lifetime channel views now, which is, it's just an insane number. It's just weird. Today it's not unlikely, if I go to Costco, that somebody comes and says hi, and hey, oh man, John, I'm a big fan, and is there any way I can get a selfie? Which is super weird. Like it's great and it's lovely, and I've never had somebody come up and go, "You're a piece of crap, Correia," but I suppose they probably wouldn't come up in that case. They just say it from afar. But that's an oddity. So ASP became my full-time job in 2017, and then my solo occupation in 2018. And we've been doing it. We've been posting the daily videos. We started on our company Facebook page, in October of 2014. So 11 years now, transitioned to YouTube in April of 16. And, it's a labor of love. So yeah, and I try to bring that background. So I'm not trying to proselytize your audience, but I'm a Jesus guy, right? So, today I would, kind of identify as a follower of the way of Jesus. And I just want to help people protect their loved ones from criminal violence and make a difference in their world. So you'll hear me a lot talk about being a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person, and doing smart things, and, surviving the fight if you end up in the fight, staying out of the fight if you can possibly stay out of the fight. I get to do a good bit of expert witness work now. So going to court and talking about, especially with incidents caught on video, there's obviously nobody else that's done what I've done in that arena. So, we get to talk in court, and so now I've got firsthand knowledge of the court system and how it works, and having the, this as a cop, right? When the criminal justice system points at you, the process is the punishment, and it is never a good time. So, but here's how to navigate that. And here's the strengths and weaknesses and the pitfalls of the process. So, I try to bring that pastoral approach and try to bring that idea of my mission is not to kung fu bad guys. My mission is to be a good neighbor and to be a good husband and father. My wife and I have been married for 30 years. My kids are all adults now.
You must be doing something right. I'm kind of in the same boat. Well, I'm on my second marriage, but I think I got it figured out this time. But yeah. When your kids are productive members of society, that's kind of confirmation that you're on the right track. I'm glad you brought up your background, John, because someone may think, well, who's this dude who was a pastor? And, why should I believe what he says? He's a martial artist. Yeah, but who is he to do all this? Well, who you are is someone that became an expert, a court certified expert. And you've also, you are involved as well, or were, I believe, with Force Science Institute. Want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
Force Science. I am today considered Force Science's ambassador, and man, do I love what they do. So when I started really taking it seriously, I would say, I mean, really, when I recognized, it was probably early 2016, where I was like, dude, yeah, I'm a martial artist. Yeah, I've taken some handgun classes. Yeah, I'm an instructor in firearms too, but this is life and death, man. I got to get serious about this, because, if I'm teaching cooking and my advice is bunk, well, the worst that happens to somebody is they got to go order a pizza. But in this arena, if I give bunk advice, well, people die. Like, life is at stake here. So I got to be good at this. So I started training like a dog. And I mean, like a dog. The year that I quit my job, I remember my first day with ASP Solo was February 1st of 2018. And right before that, I told my wife, I was like, hey, without a full-time job, this is going to be my full-time job, and I'm going to train like a dog. And my wife was like, okay, don't borrow any money, pay your bills, pay your staff, and pay me my paycheck, and I don't care what you do. And I was like, remember you said that. And I started, I think for 4 years in a row, I did 300 plus hours of training as a student every year. I just went full tilt boogie. And in 2019, I was doing instructor level certs in firearms, and, I did all of Masada Youb's, I did Mag 40. We hosted the largest deadly force instructor Masada has ever taught. We had like 51 students in that class. We had to take over an auditorium for it. Then in 2019, I applied because Force Science had a Force Science analyst course that was here in Phoenix, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was here in Phoenix. I was like, dude, it's a flagship, analyst course, and I can sleep in my own bed. It's the cheapest that I'll ever get it. So I applied, and it was like 6 months away, and like 3 months, I still hadn't heard anything. And so I'm like, hey, can I register? Can I pay? I put in my registration, and they're like, hey, we're still analyzing, John. We're still considering your application. And I was like, ooh, okay. So then I finally got approved. Unbeknownst to me, they had never allowed a non-sworn person, so a non-police officer, into that class. And so the first day of class, I remember it was me and 72 cops. So you got all these dudes in mufti with badges and all that stuff. And then little old me, and I was like, okay. So on a break, I went up, Dr. Lewinsky, who is the founder of Force Science, was there teaching. And I went and shook his hand. Hi, Dr. Lewinsky. My name's John Correia, and I just want you to know I really appreciate you allowing me to be here. And he looked at me and he was like, oh, I know who you are, John. We thought long and hard, and we recognize the contribution you're making, and we think we can help you. And I was like, I agree. That course was amazing, still is amazing. So I was the first non-sworn person to receive Force Science analyst certification. And then last year, 2024, I was the first non-sworn person to go through their advanced Force Science specialist course, which is about a 350-hour course. I mean, that is a brutal, you're talking deep dives. And I just was talking to a friend about it who's a cop, and he's like, John, do you think this class I can do it? And I was like, well, man, if you have about 15 hours a week to read, and I'm talking about like research reading, I'm not talking about reading, your favorite novel. I'm talking about diving deep and having like lots of data and lots of evidence basis, and then analyzing that and synthesizing it with other research on human performance, on vision, on perception, decision-making, memory, those things. I think it's a really valuable course. I've taken several other classes from them as well. And I think, it's funny. I had a call with Dr. Lewinsky, who I greatly admire. That man is really transformative. And Von Kleem, as well with them, who's given me some great mentorship in the expert witness realm. And when I was talking to Dr. Lewinsky last, he said, John, what we see is that you are doing in the private citizen space what Force Science has been doing in the law enforcement space for the last 20 years.
Interesting. I was going to just to piggyback on that, John. So a lot of law enforcement training is, I learned from my field training officer who learned from his field training officer. And it's a lot of stuff where it's just, this is the way we've always done it. Something as innocuous as how you place the gear on your belt, right? Well, I was taught in the academy to carry it this way and this here and this there. But the Force Science Institute stuff, when I first saw that stuff, which was years ago now, it was very refreshing and eye-opening, because it's like kind of what we talked about earlier when you guys are kind of figuring out, well, here's how an attack really occurred. There's video evidence of this. What could someone do to better their odds of prevailing in this situation? And that's kind of like what Force Science was to me. I wasn't nearly as involved with it as you, but just as a kind of a casual person who likes to keep up on law enforcement use of force trends and everything like that. I was the use of force, like the primary use of force instructor at my department. But that was cool because it debunked a lot of myths that had stood for generations.
Yes.
even something, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but like how you approach a suspect who has assumed a prone position. How can you most safely approach that suspect? And a lot of what I was taught was to approach them at an angle from the front for handcuffing and all this stuff. But I believe, and this is years and years ago, but they advocated a different approach, which was flew in the face of what I had always been taught, but it made a lot of sense. And rather than being based on tradition, force science it takes into account human factors, like you mentioned. And to me, that is critical. It's not what you can do on your best day in a well-lit dojo that's 72 degrees on a matted surface against a compliant opponent. It's what's going to happen when you're taken by surprise. You are not paying attention, because let's face it, our phones and everything else, there's more distractions now than there's ever been. I truly believe that. And as diligent as we are, there are times, if you're honest with yourself and do a real self-assessment, you'll realize, man, that guy could have had me. If that guy wanted me right then, he could have had me. And so that understanding what you're capable of and what your vulnerabilities are is critically important, because you have to understand what is feasible and what is not feasible in a real world attack. And I think that Force Science Institute has done a lot of good work in that regard, specifically for law enforcement profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all applicable. I tell folks all the time, like, look, so what I do some law enforcement, but primarily private citizens. But so far, at least 100% of law enforcement is drawn from the population of the human race. So when we're talking about human performance, that's applicable to all humans.
Yeah.
Because humans are human, right? So, I mean, in the advanced specialist course in particular, we're reading stuff by Gary Klein on recognition prime decision making, going all the way back to Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, right? And how we make decisions under stress and how to streamline that process. So in the training side, then, I love that Force Science and others that they look to do primary level research. How fast do these things happen? How fast can somebody from a proned out position raise up and fire a gun? And, where is the hardest for them to raise up and fire a gun? And let's run experiments and let's see. And
let's use some Sims guns. Yeah, let's use some Sims guns, put people on the timer, see what happens. And I think that's very beneficial. And even if you don't agree with every finding, I don't know if finding is the right term, but every conclusion or whatever that Force Science or any other organization may come to, it's important to understand that process, and you can ultimately make your own decision. But you look at that information and you use that to evaluate how you're going to do something. And if you don't do that, if you're just so technique based that I know this technique is going to work, or this technique, well, it's not technique based. It should be principle based, which you hit on earlier. And a lot of people talk the talk when it comes to having a principle based system of self defense, but very few people walk the walk. So it's something that I think is crucially important, to get away from the technique based and look at the actual problem and figure out a solution based on what really could happen. Because, like in your case with ASP, you're showing videos that did happen. So what's the odds of that happening? It's 100% for that poor victim in that circumstance. It was 100% certainty that it would happen. So that's critical as well. I want to talk a little bit about what may be some common misconceptions that people have about real world violence. And I know we get a lot of that from television and stuff, and assume that, like, when someone's shot with a handgun round, they're going to fly back and go through the wall and things like that. But what's been kind of an eye-opening thing for you as you're teaching this stuff and on the forefront of teaching people about real world violence? What do you think are some common misconceptions that the average person may have?
Yeah, I like to joke that most people get their gunfighting knowledge from John Wick. And, of course, the guns in John Wick, very real and very accurate. The gunfighting, no, very Hollywood. And not very accurate. So, built for stylization. Now there are a couple, you go watch Heat, and they actually use really good technique and really good tactics because they were taught by an actual tactician how to do them. But there are several, everybody has this idea in their head how their gunfight's going to go. And I do default and go back. I think that, Tom Givens of Rangemaster is, he's kind of one of the kind of Mount Rushmore of firearms trainers in America over the last maybe 30 years. And Tom says, the bad guy gets to set the time and place of the attack, and he's only going to tell you about it at the last minute. And so, okay, cool. Like, that's really a good reminder that, remember, I think that people think, oh, okay, I'm going to have time to do all this stuff. Whereas the capital that you have, the most important commodity in a gunfight is time. And as the defender, you do not have time. You are at a time deficit the whole time. And so that's, this thing, a lot of people lose fights because they don't really realize they're in one until it's half over. And so they think, the bad guy they're going to get is going to be in a big black hat with a big mustache and is going to announce themselves far enough in advance that they're going to be able to get to their gun and do what they need to do. And they're going to come away with a flawless victory. One of the things we talk about all the time is, for instance, we've objectified and said, okay, so if you have to get your gun out from concealment in a real private citizen gunfight, how long does that take you? Well, most people don't know because they've never been to the range with a timer and with an accuracy standard. So they have no idea. Now they might think, I've been to the range where somebody's got, yeah, John, I've got a 2-second draw to first shot. Cool, man. Let's see it. Shooter ready, stand by. And next thing we know, it's 4.7. And so, the FBI has had a standard for its agents for decades of, taking a gun from a holster concealed under a concealment garment and getting an A-zone hit at 7 yards in 1.5 seconds. That's been the FBI standard for forever. And, funny part is that I don't know if they came across that by accident, but what we found is that is an excellent professional standard. And if you meet that standard, it's not that hard to meet in reality. I mean, a little bit of training and you can get there. But that's a great standard. We have also found if people are slower than 2 seconds, that it really leads to negative outcomes at very high rates.
I think that, John, came from Dennis Tooler and a drill that came to be known as the Tooler drill after him. But that became sort of bastardized into the 21-foot rule. And I remember I wanted to show a video to our cops back in the day. It was a VHS video. This tells you how old this is or how long ago this was. And my supervisor would not allow me to show the video, Surviving Edge Weapons, because he didn't want our cops to, like, anytime there's someone at a restaurant or whatever and they pick up a knife and they're within 21 feet, that they're going to, it's like,
yeah, draw a gun on it.
Our cops are smart enough. You got to give them a little bit more credit than that. But, but that is a great standard. And you're hitting on another thing, John, like the guy who told you he has that 1 second draw, that 1.5 second draw and A-zone hit at 7 yards or whatever. He may have that, but Maybe. He may have that on the 5th attempt. You know what I mean? You are as good as what you can do on your first attempt. And it's not going to be under ideal conditions on a static range. It's going to be, you're going to be fumbling with stuff. You're going to be surprised. And you have to take that into account. It's not what you are on your best day. It's what you are on your worst day. So I think that that's critical information.
Yeah. And one of the things that we work on when we teach live fire classes at ASP, mostly now, by our chief marketing officer, Neil Widener and Christopher Bean and, from Tactical Advantage. And, we teach, listen, if you can get so fast on the range, then in the real world, you can work at a 90% of that speed, which is inside kind of your easy performance barrier. And so you're not trying to operate at the ragged edges of your capability. So, I always tell folks, like, look, if you have 1 second on your best day and your standard, though, your go signal, is you can make in 1.5. Well, then when you're on your worst day, a 1.25, you're still well inside. So you don't have to hurry. It doesn't feel hurried to you. You can feel confident because you're competent.
Yeah.
So, there's things like that. By the way, Dennis Tooler, his takeaway from his research was not get your gun out in 1.5 seconds. It was move your feet. It was get yourself some space. When that guy starts charging, you got to move or you're going to get stabbed. And that is quite good. And when we see, whether it's a cop or a private citizen, when that guy charges and you start moving, well, then you get more time and that buys you options.
And I should mention real quick, just for people who may be wondering what the heck the Tooler drill is. they did some research. He did some research to determine that the average able-bodied person could close a distance of 21 feet in 1.5 seconds, which is the time that a proficient shooter should be able to draw from concealment and get an A-zone hit or 2 A-zone hits, whatever the case is. I'm blanking a little bit on that, but that's, and you don't want it to be a tie, right? So if he's going to close that distance of 21 feet in 1.5 seconds, and let's say you get a perfect shot upper chest in 1.5 seconds, that dude with the knife whose momentum is already barreling towards you is still going to reach you with that knife, because like we said, it's not the Hollywood thing. No matter if it's a 45 ACP or, you know, whatever firearm you're using, if it's a handgun, the great saying is, what does someone do after you shoot them with a handgun? Whatever they were doing before you shot them with a handgun. And that's right. That's sort of tongue in cheek, but a handgun is not going to turn someone into a puff of smoke. You're still going to potentially end up fighting this person even after you register a hit that may ultimately be fatal, but it's not going to be fatal fast enough, and often in many cases.
Correct. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the big myth, is that you're going to have enough time. And so one of our big mantras at ASP is that attention buys you time and time buys you options. So, you know, we live in an age and in a world that, of course, people are just absolutely stuck to their mobile device. And I, you know, I get it. I'm people too. And, you know, my mobile device speaks to me as well. You know, we're the ones who kind of put out into the world too. The place where attacks happen overwhelmingly is what we call transitional spaces. Which we have a definition of that is not the architectural definition. So there's an architectural definition of a transitional space. And then Kelly McCann was using that architectural definition in the 80s doing structure assault.
Yeah, Kelly is one of my biggest influences. That guy has influenced so many people that people don't even attribute him, because they learned it from someone who learned it from someone who learned it from someone who learned it from Kelly. So yeah. And nothing but respect. I mean, nothing but respect. And again, he was using that as an architectural term when you're doing structure assault. He was very, very good at that. And one of the, leading thought leaders and training leaders in that space. We use it though more as, this is a space where people transition. This is not a place where people generally hide. You know, we define that as a transitional space is anywhere that can allow an attacker to attack with an element of surprise, can allow that attacker to get away quickly, and contains valuables that attacker would want. So things like, you know, we call them stop and robs for a reason. You know, you're in that convenience store. Well, guess what? The parking lot of that convenience store is designed to get people in and out quickly. They can get in the door with a gun in their hand, rob the place very quickly and get gone. And there's valuables in that store. That's a transitional space. Sidewalks, you know, you're sitting out in public. A bad guy can roll up quick, whether it's on a motorcycle, in a car, point a gun at your face, get your valuables and be gone in just seconds. So spaces like that, parking lots, the gas pumps, that's where we see attacks happen just again and again and again and again. And we, you know, we try folks, you know, they think, well, wait a minute, you know, where am I going to get attacked? And so they think that when they are in a spot where it's not, you know, when you're in the back of Walmart, the chances of you getting attacked by a mugger in the frozen foods aisle of Walmart is just nil. I mean, it just doesn't happen back there. When you're up at the registers, that's a different story. Now, I'm not saying to take it easy and just, you know, take a nap in the frozen foods aisle and be, you know, hyper alert and vigilant up at the registers, but just pay attention, right? So if you just pay attention and you just look around and be curious like a 4-year-old, like a 5-year-old, then you can see things coming from a ways away. And when you see that guy, you know, again, when something's out of place, your spidey senses start going off. That's your subconscious telling you something ain't right, man. Pay attention. And oh, wait, why is that wrong? Let me see what's going on here. The analogy that I love to make is like, if you're sitting in your house watching TV and then you go and you smell and it smells like something's burning. If you just go, that's weird. You're stupid. Like, wait a minute. If you're paying attention though, and you go, that smells like something's burning. Now I need to investigate. Now I need to go, why is something burning? I might have left the oven on. There might be something out in the garage that, you know, my car's burning down. Or the neighbor's house is on fire. Or somebody burned some popcorn and threw it in the trash and I just got a whiff of it, you know? But doing that, paying attention gives you time to investigate, to then give you options if something goes wrong. If it was, you know, a fire, right? I can go get my fire extinguisher if it was a small fire and put it out, as opposed to not paying attention until the conflagration is on me. Yeah. Just realizing that it could be worst case scenario. Like, it's not necessarily you smell something, you're going to go investigate it. It's not as though you start running out of the house thinking it's burning down, but at the same time, you would be foolish, as you mentioned, to just continue to watch television. So yeah, absolutely 100% on mark there, brother. So one of the things I want to talk about is like less lethal self-defense tools. By that I mean, let's say pepper spray. There's a civilian version of the taser that's popular, gaining popularity, I should say. Some people may carry an ASP or whatever else, just depending on where you're at and what's legal. But I'm going to use that to talk about another thing too, that I'm not sure if you're very familiar with it. I'm not, and I don't think anybody is really familiar with it. But the Mark Sanchez thing that just happened.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I've read a couple news stories about it. We don't have a whole lot of details yet.
Yeah. The former NFL quarterback, if people have been living under a rock, former NFL quarterback and current like NFL color commentator, got in a really bizarre fight with a gentleman I think was 69 years old or something like that. So the person that was involved in this altercation with Sanchez tried to use less lethal options. He tried to use pepper spray. Again, I wasn't there. I haven't seen video of this. I don't know that anybody has outside of the people investigating the situation. But I just want to use this as a situation to talk about the effectiveness or potential downfalls of over-relying on a less lethal option. So pepper spray didn't work. Ultimately, I believe he drew out a knife, and I think both people ended up being cut with a knife, which goes back to your point about, if there's a knife involved, there's a high probability you're going to get cut. But I don't know if you've heard any more about that incident than I have. I don't expect you to provide analysis because this just happened and there's not information out there to really analyze this fully. So I'm not asking for that, but I just want to ask about your opinion of less lethal tools. Do you think they're a good thing, or do you think people become over-reliant on them, or maybe both?
Well, I do think they're a good thing. I think that they are generally highly advisable for the vast majority of people. In court, I have seen plenty of people charged for an overuse of force, for the use of a firearm when it wasn't warranted. It's very seldom that you get charged for the use of pepper spray when it wasn't warranted. And even if you do, that's like a misdemeanor assault. Like you can get away with that and still live your life, right? Like, you go back to the real world with a misdemeanor assault conviction. Not with an ag assault conviction. If, you point a gun or shoot a gun at somebody, no, you're going to go to prison for a while on that. So I love less lethal tools. I think that, I've got 19 years of martial arts training. I'm pretty good with my hands. I'm not at all saying that I can't get my butt whooped. But I'm saying I'm going to make you pay retail for it at least. And I still carry less lethal every day because I don't want to get in a fight with you if I can possibly help it. I am not a fan for the average private citizen of a conductive electrical weapon or, what most people would consider a taser. Certainly not a stun gun. I mean, the stun guns, which are the knockoff brands.
That's like an 80s fad. Yeah.
Those are terrible. Like just hard no. The challenge with a taser, we jokingly, going back to the movie Anchorman, we jokingly call taser the Sex Panther of defensive tools. 60% of the time it works every time. And in a law enforcement context, they only will bring a taser out under policy almost everywhere I've ever seen if they have lethal cover available. And so if you don't have lethal cover, and as a private citizen, you ain't got no lethal cover, you're all on your own. The taser is a use case that it's all or nothing. It's 100% or 0%. And so, we see it fail too often for that to be an issue. With OC spray, there's a couple of things. I'm a big fan of OC, of pepper spray. But however, big caveat, there's a lot of crappy OC spray on the market that is, sold at the entrance aisle or
at the hardware store. Yeah.
Yeah, at the hardware store, and that stuff is hot garbage. And plenty of stuff you can buy on Amazon, also hot garbage with unreliable formula. Also, you need to recognize, OC spray, about 10% of the population or so is low effect. You're a cop, you see all guys go through the academy and take a dose of pepper spray so that they know what it's like. And if you've got an academy class of 60 guys, and gals, probably 5 or 6 of them are going to go, well, that kind of sucks. And then carry on with whatever it was they were doing. Whereas, the rest of them are going to go, and the snot rockets and the unable to open their eyes.
And one of the reasons, John, I think that people, why that is so effective in the academy setting, when you just saw all your academy mates and they're getting hit with pepper spray and like you just said, the tendency, and then you feel it and it maybe does the same thing to you. The tendency is to think that's going to work that's going to work that way on everybody in the real world. But not only are there a certain percentage that's going to be ineffective based on their makeup, but there's people that will fight through that, even if it does affect them. If they are fully committed, pepper spray, oftentimes it is a good option, but you just have to have a plan B. And that applies for everything. So in other words, you may spray pepper spray, he may close distance, and now you got pepper spray on you. You may have that can, maybe the can now becomes an impact weapon in order to create space to get to your firearm or get the heck out of there or whatever. So I think that it's kind of like what you alluded to earlier with the lucky rabbit's foot firearm analogy. Like pepper spray is not a magic talisman, like you pull that out and everything is okay. Yep. It's one in a layered approach to self-defense. It's a potentially effective tool. And the same could be said for, an ASP baton or any number of things.
And the thing with OC spray is, remember, the mission of a private citizen is to break contact with a threat, right? So a lot of times, it's cops who do training for private citizens, which is great. You just got to recontextualize. A cop's mission is to close contact with somebody who's a lawbreaker and take them into custody. So that's literally the opposite mission of a private citizen. Some guy's threatening me. Now, of course, a less lethal tool is only useful against ordinary force. So somebody says, I'm going to kick your butt. Now maybe an OC spray is a good idea. Somebody's got a knife in their hand. Unless you don't have any other options, that's the time for your firearm.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Now it's time to shoot somebody because they're a deadly threat. Whereas I'm going to kick your butt. I believe you. I'd really rather not have my butt kicked. Thank you. So I want to break contact. So to me, the OC spray is an opportunity to break contact. If I hit him with the hot sauce, and it takes him a couple seconds and he goes, oh, yuck, man, whatever. I take those 2 seconds to get out of there, to break contact if at all possible with my loved ones. Even if he's low effect, some effect changes his demeanor for a minute for me to get out of there. And 90% of the time, okay, it's gonna give him enough effect that I can break contact and I don't have to do so super quick, but always having a plan B. And of course, if he is low effect or is very committed. I've really made somebody mad in a road rage situation and they came out of the car, or I offended some guy at the Piggly Wiggly and he wants to kick my butt and I hit him with the hot sauce and no, he's still determined to kick my butt. Okay. Now it's time for Jack Johnson and Tom O'Leary. And here we go, which is why I say for private citizens too, some empty-handed skills are really important.
Yeah. Even if most of our viewers and listeners, I think are firearms folks. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, just having a firearm, even if you're super proficient with a firearm, that's just one tool. I mean, and it's probably not going to be the right tool going by the odds. In other words, a lot greater chance that you're going to be assaulted in such a way that a less lethal response is appropriate versus a lethal response. So that's very important. These days, we have a lot of advantages when it comes to pistols. We have pistols that are they're very shootable, very small, so they're easy to conceal. And also, we have things like red dot sights that make them easier to aim. I noticed that in the last several years, I was a very early adopter to red dots on pistols.
Me too.
Not as early as Kelly McCann, who was, if not I think he was probably the first commercially to be producing videos and stuff using a red dot. And back then, it stood up a lot higher off the slide. And
big old Seymour sight on top of a gun.
We've come a long way, but it's a much more intuitive way to aim. I'd like to get your thoughts, particular with regard to handguns and red dot sights, whether or not you think that's advantageous and why or why not.
Yeah, I was an early adopter as well. I've been carrying a dot every day since 2017. I personally, unless you really twisted my arm, unless for some reason you forced me to, I would not go back to not having a dot on my pistol. I just think there's no disadvantage at all. The second you get some training with it, it's just as fast up close, and it is an absolute game changer at any kind of distance. So no downsides, tons of upsides. Well, I mean, the downsides are a couple. You got to maintain them. You've got to check your batteries. Make sure that they've got the dot. But some people really worry about that. I'm like, if you're worrying about that, you need to dry practice more, because I have my gun out of the holster to dry practice with it enough that I will see if I start having any blinkies in my dot. And then, some folks worry about things like, occlusion of the lens or something like that. And I'm like, look, man, as a cop out on patrol, maybe because you got this big 5-gallon bucket holding your gun offset. As a concealed carrier, it's right against my body and covered.
Yes.
And so the chances of it having a problem are just nil. Like I run an open emitter dot, and people are, oh my gosh, John, why don't you run a closed dot? I'm a concealed carrier. It's not a problem really. So, I do love a dot. Now, of course, if you're going to do something like pocket carry, if that's the best solution for you, man, that extra height on the gun can become very problematic, unless you have like ginormous pockets for some crazy reason. I waist carry, and I really recommend on body carry for sure. And having it on the waist, I think a dot is just, to me, kind of a no brainer. And what we've seen over the last couple of years in classes is it's shifted from, back in 2017, when I showed up to a class with a dot on it, everybody was like, ooh, I want to see that. That's like an oddity, an anomaly. To, maybe 3-4 years ago, you'd see half the class have a dot. Whereas today, if you show up to a training class, probably the one or two people who might show up with iron sights are the anomaly. That I've gone viral a little bit for jokingly calling people who use iron sights gun Amish. That you're, like my Amish friends who said, 1886 is enough technology. Like that's as much technology as we can handle. No more than that. Anything more than that is not allowed. And so I joke that folks that don't like the dot are gun Amish, and that's all it is. It's a joke. And can you do good work with irons? Sure, you can do good work with irons, but that's just like I tell folks,
handicap yourself, right? Why handicap yourself? But it's a skill that you need to have, though. It's like driving a manual transmission vehicle. It's good to have that skill, but it's, it is an automatic easier. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, because so for about 3.5 years, I drove a Mustang GT. And it was fast and it was awesome. And I bought the one I bought specifically because it had the 6-speed manual in it. And why? Because it's a muscle car, and a muscle car needs 3 pedals, for God's sake, right? And I've known how to drive a manual since I rode motorcycles when I was 5 years old. And so people, kind of take that analogy and depending on where you live, if you live in Europe, if you live in Africa, if you live in Asia, then you probably need to be able to drive a manual transmission vehicle. Here in the United States, 5% of vehicles are sold with manual transmissions. And so I always say, teach a new driver. Why would you teach a new driver on a manual transmission? For God's sake, put them in an automatic. One less thing to worry about while they worry about learning how to drive. If later that becomes an important thing, you can learn how to drive a manual transmission vehicle if you need to learn how to do it. And same thing, we start brand new shooters off now on the dot. Bullet's going to go where the dot says. So keep seeing and keep your eyes turned on. Hit the record button on your eyes so that you're seeing the target and seeing where the dot hovers over the target. And the bullet's going to go right where that dot is. So, just keep seeing where it is. Keep the dot there until the shot breaks, and then the bullet's going to go right there. And people that's fairly intuitive. And
it's a lot easier to learn than to relearn. In other words, like if you have a ton of experience on iron sights, even if you're a phenomenal shooter, it's going to be a hard transition for you. Not hard. It's going to be a more difficult transition for you than someone who's brand new and they're not trying to align anything. They're not trying to align dots because sights rather, because they just know you put the dot on the target, you press the trigger. And as long as you don't jerk the trigger, that dot that you're seeing is going to turn into a 9mm hole on the target or whatever the case may be. So that's interesting stuff there. Do you notice a difference in performance between students with a red dot on their pistol versus students who are just shooting iron sights?
Well, certainly. I mean, there's really easy objective differences once we get out past 7 yards. Really at 10 yards and beyond, especially as we get a little older, right? So as we get a little older and our vision starts to have more challenges, I'm almost 50 years old. I turned 50 in January. And so my focal plane, my eye's ability to shift focal planes takes a little longer than it did when I was 20.
I'm with you, brother. I'm right there with you on that one.
It just does, know? And so the dot, just not even from the perspective of I don't have to align sights, but that I don't have to shift focal planes, makes me so much faster and so much more accurate. And some people complain and say, well, John, if you shoot somebody that's beyond 7 yards, you're going to prison. Man, there are plenty of justified defensive gunfights for private citizens. I mean, tons for cops.
Yeah.
But for private citizens, even that go out 10, 15, 20, 25 yards. We talk about Elijah Dickens at the mall in Indiana, who had shots at 42 yards. Now, let's say Elijah had an iron-sighted gun with a janky front sight on it. Okay. So we know his front sight was damaged in a motorcycle wreck he had not long before. So, okay. I mean, you could do that work too, man. Like awesome. Would have been easier if he'd had a pistol mounted optic on his gun. So, I think that especially what we see is accuracy and speed at anything past 7 yards. We see a marked fall off among the iron-sighted shooters until you get really good. I mean, really good iron-sighted shooters. You watch somebody who's an A class, M class, GM class shooter in USPSA or a master in IDPA, something like that. They're going to shoot fast and accurate, but they've put a lot of time into the craft too.
And one of the things that's important, we talked about human performance factors earlier briefly. I think one of the huge advantages of having a red dot on your pistol is that under duress, the tendency is going to be to focus on that which is about to hurt you or that which you feel threatened by. Going back to your shifting of focus, if you have iron sights, you're focused on the threat. Is he a threat? Yes, he is a deadly threat. Okay, I'm up. Do I have equal height, equal light? And then, okay, back on him. Is he still a threat? That type of thing. And then finally back to the front sight for that front sight focus before you press the shot. Whereas with a red dot, you look at the bad guy, which is what you're going to do instinctively, and you just overlay that dot on the bad guy, and it's just a much simpler solution. And again, I'm not knocking iron sights. They've worked for a lot of people for a lot of years. But why would you not avail yourself the advantage of a red dot since it's available to us?
Well, and not only that, but if I'm going to put it on the high center chest on a bad guy, well, then everything below that is covered by a gun in iron sight. So I can't see what's going on with his hands, with his waist. I can't see if that threat is continuing. Whereas with a pistol mounted optic, I have more bad guy in the window. And so through that window, and with, especially if I'm able to shoot a dot, which most people are with both eyes open. So now I've got binocular vision that is seeing as well. Then I'm focused on the threat still and what the threat is doing, which not only I think gives me broader and better awareness of what's happening, but it lets me not only start shooting better, but it lets me stop sooner. And we see plenty, man. I see lots of badge cams that cops get in trouble when they keep shooting too late, when they keep after somebody. And sometimes
the first 4 rounds may be justified when they're analyzing this afterward, right? But then maybe the 5th and 6th rounds are not. And that's problematic. It's not like, well, I was justified to fire, so I could just dump my whole magazine. Well, not necessarily the case from a legal perspective. Yeah.
Well, or if I had, I ripped 3 shots at him and then I realized, oh golly, I need to see my sights here as he's running off. But I'm now thinking, oh no, I need to see my sights. And so then I spend time adjusting and seeing my front sight, doing those things. That took 2.5 seconds. And then I finally rip one off, and the district attorney looks at that and goes, wait a minute. You waited 2.5 seconds to shoot that last shot. That's evidence that you intended to kill him. And you go, no, I was just realizing I needed to aim. And so then it took me that long to aim this stupid gun. Now we can hopefully explain that to a district attorney later. But if instead I'm still intuitively recognizing, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I shot 3-4 times. He's running off and now I've got to find my dot if I lost it or something, but I'm still looking at the threat. And now I recognize, okay, he is running off and I don't rip that last shot off.
Yeah.
That's a real advantage.
That is a tremendous advantage. I wonder if you have any time behind Aimpoint pistol optics like the Acro P2, or have you had a chance to shoot the new Koa?
I have not gotten a chance to shoot the Koa, especially now, of course, I think that they started really focusing on their law enforcement market, right?
They're a little hard to get right now, a little hard to come by.
A little hard to get. I mean, they're the hotness, right?
Yes.
So, I do have some time behind an Acro, and, it's obviously, it is one of the few that I recommend for defensive use. In the cop world, we call it duty use. In the private citizen world for carry use, or, sometimes we jokingly call it social use, right? Because my biggest requirement for a pistol mounted optic is that it be reliable, is that I know it's going to handle the thing with a pistol mounted dot is that it needs to handle unbelievable forces. Like when you look from a physics perspective at what the electronics and the glass and stuff in a dot has to handle, you're like, oh my gosh, the G-forces are unbelievable in there.
That slide reciprocation is no joke. Someone who's not familiar may assume that like a rifle or shotgun optic would take a lot more recoil forces than a pistol mounted optic, but that's not the case.
It's just simply not true. Yeah. So, Aimpoint, that Acro P2, especially the P2. I like the P2 because, the Aimpoint brought it back to a really useful battery life, and so good, works well. The glass clarity is good. And so it's one of only a couple that I go, yeah, that's absolutely a useful and usable dot.
John, I'm in the Phoenix area too, man. So we'll hook up and get to the range together one of these days, and I'll let you put some rounds through my, Glock 48 with the Koa. It's such a great setup. So
I'd love it, man. That'd be great.
Let's do it. Hey, as we wind down here, brother, where can people go to find the good work you're doing and to educate themselves about what real world violence looks like, which again is the first step toward making yourself and your loved ones more safe?
Yeah, I mean, you can always find us on our website, activeselfprotection.com. You can go on YouTube and just search Active Self Protection. Both our channels will come up there. The second one is very creatively named Active Self Protection Extra. And we also have our own app. So if you download, if you go to the App Store on iOS or the Google Play on Android, you can download it, Roku, Amazon Fire, and all those things too. There are plenty of lessons there. There's, I think, 300 or 400 pieces of content that's free for everyone there. There's a paid tier in that has an awful lot of bonuses and things like that. So you can find us in all those places, and we'd love to have you.
Well, you're providing a heck of a service for people. It's going to help keep people safe. And I thank you for that, brother. Thank you so much for being here today as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Always great to have a good discussion.
Yeah, we'll get together on the range soon, bro.
Sounds great.
All right, guys, that's a wrap for this episode with John Correia. If this episode resonated with you, be sure and let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.